On her wedding day, my daughter left me outside. She hung my photo at the entrance with the words, "No entry," for everyone to see. Yes, my own daughter had banned me from the wedding, like I was a criminal. Any regular father would have yelled, exploded, and forced his way in. But I did the opposite. I placed the gift on the ground and went straight to the bank. 3 hours later, and 62 missed calls, the entire wedding had collapsed. Want to know how a simple signature ruined everything? Stay until the end of the story. Before we continue, help us grow by subscribing to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Earl Green, and maybe you think a retired literature teacher doesn't have much to teach about real life. Let me tell you something. After 35 years shaping young minds in Newport, I've learned that the best lessons don't come from books. For 3.5 decades, I woke up every day with purpose. Not for money, but for the chance to plant seeds that would grow for generations. My wife, Margaret, used to laugh when I came home talking about my boys, like they were my own children. When she passed away 5 years ago, Lauren became my whole world. Lauren was everything a father could hope for. Smart, driven, graduated with honors in business. We built her future together, brick by brick, college paid for, her first apartment, every achievement celebrated side by side. Our Sundays were sacred, those long lunches where we talked about everything from Shakespeare to her career goals. She used to say I was her hero, that she wanted to find a man with my integrity. Our family always took pride in strong values, the kind of moral justice passed down through generations. We were an unshakable team, father and daughter against the world. But you know how life is, right? Sometimes one person shows up and changes everything. For Lauren, that person was Colin Hatcher. He appeared like an elegant storm, tailored suit, imported car, the smile of someone who knows every secret to success. He called himself a finance expert and talked about investments the way others talk about the weather. Lauren was fascinated. And me? I just watched. As a teacher, I'd learned to read between the lines. But even the best readers get fooled by a pretty cover. Our Sundays began to vanish like snow in summer. Lauren started canceling lunches, always with Colin-related reasons, important meetings, urgent business deals. When we did meet, she only talked about him and his big ideas. I asked questions, tried to understand, but she brushed them off with that new smile she'd picked up. "Dad, you wouldn't get it. It's just modern stuff." Every word felt like another door shutting between us. The daughter who once shared everything with me now treated me like a well-meaning dinosaur. The request came on an ordinary afternoon, wrapped in urgency disguised as desperation. Colin called me directly, the first time we'd spoken alone in months. His voice sounded different, less confident, almost vulnerable. "Earl, I need your help. It's about Lauren's wedding." My heart raced. He was finally acknowledging me as her father, finally needed me. How naive I was. He explained that his investments were temporarily frozen, a technical issue that would be resolved in a few weeks. The wedding date was set, the vendors were pressing, and they needed $50,000. "Just a short-term loan, Earl. Lauren doesn't need to know. $50,000. It was nearly all of my emergency savings, the money Margaret and I had scraped together over decades of teaching. My pension covered the bills, but that amount was my safety net, my peace of mind. Colin swore it would be paid back before the wedding. "You're family now, Earl. Family helps each other." The word family echoed in my mind like a church bell. For months I'd felt excluded, ignored, treated like an outdated burden. Now they needed me. Maybe this was my chance to earn back my daughter's respect, to prove I still mattered. But something about that conversation deeply unsettled me. Why didn't Lauren ask me herself? Why was Colin so insistent that she not find out? When I questioned it, he answered quickly. "She's proud, Earl. She'd be embarrassed knowing her dad had to cover her wedding." It made sense. I knew my daughter's temperament. Still, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was wrong. But the desperation of a rejected father is louder than the wisdom of an experienced man. I signed the check that very afternoon, hoping to buy back my daughter's love. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Or rather, what should have been an invitation. Lauren showed up at my door, but didn't come in. She stood at the threshold, holding an envelope like it was a death sentence. "Dad, About the wedding. My heart filled with hope. She had finally come to include me, to thank me for helping, to give me the seat of honor I deserved. But the words that came out of her mouth were like daggers. Colin and I decided it's better if you don't attend. It's a very exclusive, very refined event. You wouldn't fit in. A daughter humiliating her father with the coldness of someone discarding an old piece of furniture. In that moment, something inside me died, and something far more dangerous took its place. You'd think I walked away shouting, breaking things, calling her in desperation. Any regular father would, right? But let me tell you something about spending 35 years teaching rebellious teenagers. You learn that emotional outbursts are exactly what they want. They provoke, push limits, wait for the drama. But when you don't give them what they expect, when you stay calm and in control, that's when they start to worry. I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where Margaret used to read her novels, and I started thinking clearly. The first thing I did was fully accept the situation. Sounds strange, I know, but acceptance is the first step to silent revenge. They'd excluded me? Perfect. I was now free from social obligations, free from having to fake politeness. I called Lauren the next day, my voice calm like a winter morning. Sweetheart, I completely respect your decision about the wedding. I hope it's a beautiful ceremony. The silence on the other end was delicious. She expected begging, tears, maybe even threats. What she got was cold courtesy from someone with nothing left to lose. In the days that followed, I kept to my regular routine. Morning coffee, walk in the park, reading in the afternoon. Neighbors asked about the wedding, and I answered with rehearsed pride. Lauren's planning something truly special. She's grown so much, so independent. Every word technically true, wrapped in subtle irony. But inside, my mind was working like a Swiss timepiece. I began re-evaluating everything, not as a rejected father but as a strategist. And strategists don't reveal their moves too early. The shift began with a simple question. Why was Colin so insistent that Lauren not know about the money? In literature, I always taught my students that when a character hides something, it's because they have a reason. Colin wasn't protecting Lauren's pride. He was protecting something far more important, himself. Honest men don't conduct business in the shadows. Honest men don't ask for secret loans. And honest men certainly don't exclude fathers from weddings after pocketing 50 grand. The question wasn't if Colin was hiding something. It was what. For years I taught Shakespeare to bored teenagers. Hamlet, Othello, Richard III, masters of deception and manipulation. I always told my students, watch the villains. They reveal their plans through actions, not words. Colin talked about decentralized finance, but his actions screamed something else. Excluding the father, the hidden loan, the rushed wedding, it was time to apply everything I taught about dishonest characters to real life. I was going to study Colin Hatcher like I'd study any literary antagonist. You know what's great about being underestimated? No one sees you as a threat. Colin saw me as a washed-up teacher, a minor obstacle already removed. Lauren saw me as a jealous father who couldn't let go. They both made the same mistake. They mistook silence for weakness. But silence, used strategically, is the most powerful weapon there is. It lets you watch, learn, plan. And I had plenty of time to plan. After all, I didn't have any social events left to attend. The first strategic decision was simple. No direct confrontation. Direct confrontation is what desperate people do. And I wasn't desperate. I was determined. Determination works differently. It's colder, more calculated, infinitely more dangerous. Colin expected me to make a scene, to stir up drama, to make it easier for him to frame me as the problematic father-in-law. Instead, I would become the perfect in-law. Respectful, quiet, seemingly resigned. While they celebrated their victory, I would begin my real work. Step 1 was to know my opponent. Not the version of Colin he sold to Lauren, the charming prince with million-dollar ventures. I needed to see the real Colin, the man behind the mask. Every teacher knows that dishonest students always leave clues. Always. Inconsistencies in stories, details that don't match, overreactions when questioned. Colin had shown all of these signs, but I'd been too busy trying to impress him to notice. That wasn't a concern anymore. Now I could observe him with the detachment of a researcher studying a curious specimen. I pulled a clean notebook from the drawer, the same kind I used to plan lessons. On the first page I wrote, Project Colin Hatcher, Character Analysis. It sounded academic, almost harmless, but it would be my war map. I started with the basics, inconsistencies in his stories, questions he avoided, moments when his mask slipped. Margaret used to laugh at my obsessive notes when I prepped for classes, said I treated every text like a mystery to be solved. She was right, and now I had a far more interesting mystery to unravel. The second page would be for behavior patterns. Colin always changed the subject when asked about his work, always had ready-made excuses for why he couldn't provide details, always promised grand things that never came to pass. These were patterns, and once you identify patterns, you can predict them. If I could anticipate his next moves, I could stay one step ahead. It was like playing chess with someone who didn't know the game had started. The third page was for my available resources. I didn't have unlimited money or powerful connections, but I had other things. Time. Plenty of free time to dedicate to the project. Experience. Decades spent dissecting complex texts and unraveling literary lies. Patience. A virtue learned from a life of dealing with teenagers. And motivation. The most powerful force of all. They had messed with my daughter and my money. That was more than enough to keep me focused for as long as necessary. The fourth tool in my arsenal was invisibility. No one suspects a retired teacher doing research. That's what we do. We research. If anyone saw me in a library, at a computer, asking questions, they'd think it was just an old man with a quirky hobby. Colin was too busy preparing for a wedding to notice he was being studied. Lauren was too wrapped up in her new life to realize her discarded father had found a new purpose. The social invisibility of old age would be my greatest advantage. On the fifth page, I began sketching a timeline. When did Colin enter Lauren's life? When did he begin influencing her against me? When did the loan request happen? When was the wedding set? Dates matter because they reveal patterns. Criminals, and I was already convinced Colin was one, usually follow scripts. They repeat behaviors that worked in the past. If I could identify his script, I could predict his next moves. And once you know what someone's going to do, you can plan devastating surprises. I closed the notebook and went to make dinner, but my mind was still working. For the first time in months, I felt in control. Not a victim reacting to events, but a strategist shaping what would come next. Colin and Lauren thought the game ended when they excluded me from the wedding. Little did they know, the game had just begun. And this time, I knew the rules far better than they did. Before bed, I made one final note. Reminder: begin investigation first thing tomorrow. Every liar leaves a trail. You just need to know where to look. I smiled as I shut the notebook. Colin had underestimated the power of patience paired with intelligence. It was a mistake that would cost him dearly. Because when a retired teacher decides to do his homework on you, the consequences can be devastatingly educational. And I've always been a very, very good teacher. The first thing I learned in decades of academic research is this: every truth leaves a digital trail. The next morning, I turned on my computer with the patience of an archaeologist about to dig into a promising site. I started with the basics, a simple search for Colin Hatcher across search engines. What I found was almost nothing. For a man who claimed to be a finance expert with international connections, his digital footprint was suspiciously clean. You know when you're searching for something and the lack of results is more revealing than any discovery? Colin had a digital presence going back only 2 years, as if he had sprung into existence at age 35. I immediately changed strategies. If Colin Hatcher didn't exist officially, maybe he existed under another name or identity. I gathered the details Lauren had casually mentioned. He studied economics in Boston, worked with funds in California, and had international experience in London. Too vague to verify, too specific to be entirely fabricated. I began to search for these fragments separately, like pieces of a complex puzzle. Investment funds in Los Angeles that had recently shut down, financial scandals in Boston, any news that mentioned fraud in the world of decentralized finance. The first real lead came by accident, as always happens in the best academic investigations. I was browsing forums for victims of financial scams. dark corners of the internet where people share stories of being deceived by polished con artists. In a thread titled "Crypto Experts Who Vanished with the Money," I found a revealing photo. It wasn't exactly Colin, but the man had the same bone structure, the same confident smile, the same taste for expensive suits. The name was different, Christopher Hall, but the eyes were unmistakable. Those same calculating eyes I had learned to distrust. Christopher Hall had operated in Miami between 2018 and 2020, selling exclusive investment opportunities to divorced and widowed women with sizable savings. His method was always the same: flawless appearance, vaguely believable success stories, promises of fast, extraordinary returns. He gained total trust, collected the money, then vanished like smoke in the wind. At least 15 women had fallen victim, with losses totaling over $500,000 in documented cases. When authorities finally got close, Christopher Hall simply vanished and resurfaced in Newport as Colin Hatcher. But I needed more than suspicion and facial resemblance. I needed concrete proof that linked Colin Hatcher to Christopher Hall once and for all. I widened my search to public records, civil lawsuits, any official document I could find online. The work was tedious, but I had taught hundreds of students how to conduct extensive, thorough bibliographic research. I knew how to dig, where to dig, and most importantly, how not to give up when the answers didn't show up right away. Every hour I poured into this effort brought me closer to the truth about the con artist who had infiltrated my family. The definitive confirmation came from the Los Angeles court records, publicly available online. A 2019 civil lawsuit listed Christopher Colin Hall as the defendant in a case filed by Sarah Mitchell, a 52-year-old widow who had lost $180,000 in a completely fictitious international investment fund. The scam described was identical to what Colin was doing to Lauren. Grand promises, fabricated urgency, and requests for money backed by vague, unverifiable technical explanations. But the most damning detail was the photo attached to the case file. It was Colin, just 5 years younger. I kept digging methodically and uncovered even more fake identities used by the same man. In Chicago, he was Colin Hayes between 2016 and 2018, operating once again in shady finance. In Atlanta, he became Chris Hutcherson from 2020 to 2022, repeating the same exact criminal behavior. The method never changed. He'd arrive in a new city, build a fake financial identity, target vulnerable women with substantial resources, carry out a well-crafted con, and vanish before authorities got close. He was a professional criminal nomad, a parasite moving systematically from host to host. Each new discovery didn't make me angrier. It made me calmer, more focused. That might sound strange, but what I felt wasn't rage. It was a deep, liberating sense of relief. I finally had logical explanations for everything. Why Lauren had changed so drastically. Why Colin always dodged specific questions about his work. Why they were rushing into marriage with no clear reason. Colin needed to complete the con before someone uncovered his criminal past. The wedding was his exit strategy. After the ceremony, he'd likely vanish with every dollar he could get. I organized all the evidence into a meticulously structured and categorized digital file. Side-by-side photo comparisons, scanned court documents, full victim testimonies, records of false addresses used, even screenshots of old social media profiles he had deleted, still recoverable through archived internet caches. It was a complete and devastating dossier, documenting a full decade of financial crimes. Any seasoned prosecutor would be thrilled to have that material handed to them for prosecution. But I wasn't ready, not yet, to involve official authorities in such a delicate situation. The most revealing part of my investigation was discovering the rigid time pattern Colin followed like a script. He never stayed more than 2 years in any one city, never reused the same identity for long, and always had a carefully planned exit strategy. He had been in Newport for exactly 18 months when he met Lauren. The wedding was scheduled in just 3 weeks. Coincidence? Absolutely not. He was right on schedule with his usual criminal operation. Marry Lauren, drain her savings, and mine, and disappear before anyone could react. I printed everything out on paper for a tangible backup. 57 pages of evidence, organized chronologically, with clear photos, official documents, and detailed victim statements. It was more investigative material than the police had managed to compile in over a decade of fragmented and disjointed inquiries across different jurisdictions. The crucial difference? I had intense personal motivation and unlimited time to dedicate solely to this case. I stored a digital copy in 3 separate locations and a physical copy in my home safe. If anything happened to me, Lauren would still be able to uncover the truth about the criminal she was about to marry. The final stage of my investigation was reaching out directly to some of Colin Hatcher's past victims. Not all. Many were desperately trying to forget and rebuild their shattered financial lives. But 3 brave women agreed to speak with me over the phone about their traumatic experiences. Their stories were hauntingly similar in every detail. Colin appeared as the perfect Prince Charming, promised to transform their lives completely, earned their full trust through psychological manipulation, and then vanished coldly with everything they had saved. Sarah Mitchell, the widow from Los Angeles, was still paying off the bank loans she had taken to invest in Colin's entirely fake funds. He was so caring and convincing, she told me, her voice still heavy with pain. So attentive to all my problems, so interested in my life. I truly believed with all my heart that he really loved me. The raw pain in her voice immediately made me think of Lauren and the romantic illusion she was living in. Did my daughter truly believe Colin loved her? Would she be able to accept the truth when I finally exposed who he really was? The emotional manipulation of predators like Colin is terrifyingly effective because it preys on our basic human need for love and belonging. I hung up the phone after the last difficult call and leaned back in my chair, processing everything. I now held enough evidence in my hands to destroy Colin Hatcher in every imaginable way. Criminally, socially, financially, personally. He was a professional serial predator who had ruined dozens of lives over the span of a decade. And now he was sleeping in my daughter's bed, planning to steal our family's money and disappear like a ghost. The irony of it all was delicious. He thought he had chosen the perfect, vulnerable victim, when in reality, he had chosen the wrong family entirely to mess with. I filed all the physical documents alphabetically and closed my computer with growing satisfaction. Tomorrow would be the day to make a crucial strategic decision. Hand everything over to the police immediately, or use the information in a more creative and personal way. Legal revenge would certainly be satisfying, but slow and uncertain. Colin might escape again, just like he had so many times in other cities. Personal revenge, however, would be immediate, devastating, and absolutely final. And I knew exactly how to execute it with surgical precision, using the very weapon Colin had unknowingly handed me. After all, Colin had asked me for those $50,000 as a temporary loan for the wedding. What he didn't realize was that this financial weapon was aimed directly at him, not at me, as he had planned. Tomorrow, Colin Hatcher would find out exactly what happens when you completely underestimate the patience, intelligence, and determination of a retired teacher with plenty of free time and a perfectly just cause. Colin Hatcher's practical education was about to begin, and I had always been an extremely rigorous and meticulous teacher. He was about to learn a lesson he would never forget for the rest of his criminal life. Before going to bed peacefully, I made one final, conclusive note in my research notebook. Colin Hatcher equals Christopher Hall, equals Colin Hayes, equals Chris Hutcherson. Criminal pattern definitively confirmed. Operational timeline fully identified. Investigative arsenal complete and devastating. Time to act decisively. I closed the notebook with a smile of genuine satisfaction. For the first time in endless months, I was truly looking forward to the next day. Not because something good was going to happen to me directly, but because something very bad, and very well-deserved, was about to happen to Colin. That night, I peacefully dreamed of Margaret for the first time in a long time. She asked me directly if I was absolutely sure about what I was planning to do. I responded in the dream with total conviction that I was. That I was protecting our daughter in the only effective way I could, using the tools I had available. Margaret smiled with approval and gently told me to do it right, once and for all. I woke up knowing exactly what I had to do next. The assembly of the investigative arsenal was now completely finished. It was time to choose which weapons to use first against the enemy. The last thing I thought about before falling into a deep sleep was that $50,000 check that was still valid. Colin naively believed it was his secure funding for the wedding of his dreams, In reality, it was my guarantee of his total and final destruction, because a check can be canceled with a simple signature at the bank, and I was extremely eager to make that liberating signature. Very, very eager to finally act. The moment of truth came 3 days later, when I decided Lauren needed to know the truth about Colin. I couldn't let my daughter marry a criminal without at least trying to save her from the trap. I called her on a random afternoon, my voice calm but firm. "Lauren, we need to talk about Colin. I've discovered some things you need to know." The silence on the other end was ice cold. "What kind of things, Dad?" I took a deep breath and said, "Things about his past. About who he really is." Her reply hit like a slap. "I'm not listening to your paranoia. Colin warned me you'd try to sabotage our wedding out of jealousy." Then she hung up on me. I tried a different approach the next day. I showed up at her house with a folder containing the most important evidence: the side-by-side photos, court documents, victim testimonies. Lauren opened the door looking annoyed, but at least she let me in. "Sweetheart, I know you don't want to hear this, but you need to see it." I started showing her pictures of Colin with different identities, lawsuits from other states, his criminal pattern. She looked for a few seconds, then pushed everything back toward me. "This is ridiculous, Dad. Colin explained all this. He has enemies in the business world. People fabricate documents to bring him down." My heart sank as I realized just how deeply Colin had brainwashed her. "Lauren, these are official court records, not fakes," I insisted, doing my best to stay patient. "This man has destroyed the lives of at least 15 women. He doesn't love you. He's using you just like he used all the others." Her reaction exploded. "Enough! You're obsessed with ruining my happiness because you can't stand seeing me with someone better than you." Her words cut deeper than any knife. "Colin was right about you. He said you'd do this. Said you'd make things up because you can't accept that your little girl grew up and doesn't need her loser daddy anymore." Each word was like poison, carefully calculated to hurt. It was obvious Colin had prepared her for this exact conversation. That same night, my phone rang. It was Colin, and his voice had a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, threatening, with no hint of politeness. "Earl, Lauren told me about your little crazy visit today. Let me make one thing very clear. If you keep spreading these lies about me, you'll regret it." I felt a chill, not from fear, but from confirmation. Colin was finally revealing his true self. "They're not lies, Colin. Or should I say Christopher? Or maybe you prefer Colin Hayes." The silence on the other end was delicious. I'd hit the bullseye. "I don't know what you're talking about, old man," he said, but there was a slight tremble in his voice. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I continued, savoring every word. "Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, Sarah Mitchell, Jessica Rodriguez, Amanda Thompson." "Want me to go on?" I heard Colin breathing heavily on the other end. When he spoke again, all pretense was gone. "Listen carefully, Professor. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have resources you can't imagine. Contacts who can make your life very difficult." The threat was clear, but I didn't feel fear. I felt exhilaration. Colin was losing control, revealing who he truly was. "Is that a threat, Colin?" I asked calmly. "Because if it is, I suggest you think twice before threatening a man who has nothing left to lose." Colin tried to backpedal, realizing he'd gone too far. "It wasn't a threat, Earl. It was just a friendly piece of advice. You're old, confused, seeing things that aren't real. Lauren's worried about your mental health." Now he was trying to paint me as senile, questioning my sanity. A classic manipulator's move. When faced with evidence, attack the credibility of the person presenting it. "My mind is perfectly clear, Colin. So clear that I managed to trace a full decade of your crimes." I hung up before he could reply. The war was officially on, and I had just won the first battle by forcing him to show his claws. The next day, Lauren showed up at my door with Colin. It was the first time he'd come to my house since I uncovered his real identity, and the tension was thick in the air. "Dad, Colin told me about your insane phone call yesterday," Lauren began, her voice cold as ice. "He's worried about you. So am I. I think you need professional help." Colin stood next to her, smiling with that condescending expression I'd come to despise. "Earl, I know this is a difficult time for you, But you can't project your insecurities onto me, he said with false compassion. Lauren loves me, and I love her. Nothing you make up is going to change that. Make up? I repeated, locking eyes with him. Like the lawsuits in Los Angeles, the victims in Miami, Christopher Colin Hall. With each name I mentioned, I saw Colin grow more tense, though he tried to hold his mask in place. Lauren, meanwhile, looked genuinely confused. What's he talking about, Colin? She asked. Colin was quick to respond. He's delusional, sweetheart. Your father's inventing people and situations that don't exist. It's common for men his age, especially after a recent loss. The way he was using Margaret's death against me made my blood boil, but I stayed calm. This was my chance to watch them interact, to see Colin manipulate Lauren in real time. Lauren, have you verified anything Colin's told you about his work? I asked directly. Have you visited his office? Met colleagues? Talked to clients? I saw Colin visibly shift at the questions. Dad, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to interrogate my fiancé like he's a criminal. Colin wrapped his arm around her possessively. Exactly, darling. Your father wants you to treat me like a suspect because he can't handle the fact that you chose a successful man. The manipulation was so blatant it nearly made me laugh. Colin was literally using Lauren as a shield, making her feel guilty for even thinking of questioning him. I decided to switch tactics and strike where Colin least expected. Colin, since you're so successful, I'm sure you can repay the $50,000 you borrowed from me. The silence that followed was deafening. Lauren looked back and forth between us in total surprise. $50,000? She asked. Colin began to stammer. Well, it was just temporary. A cash flow issue. You borrowed money from my father? Lauren's voice rose an octave. Why didn't you tell me? Colin tried to recover. I didn't want to worry you with temporary financial details. It'll be paid back before the wedding. But the damage was done. For the first time, I saw doubt in Lauren's eyes. Colin realized he had lost ground and tried to take control of the situation. Earl, I think you'd better return the fake documents you created about me. Document forgery is a federal crime. Now he was accusing me of falsification, trying to flip the narrative. Lauren, your father is committing crimes to sabotage our wedding. Maybe it's time we considered legal action. His audacity was astonishing. A professional con artist threatening me with legal consequences for exposing his crimes. Lauren looked between us, clearly torn between loyalty to her father and love for her fiancé. Dad, this has gone too far, she finally said. If you don't stop with these accusations, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely. That's exactly what he wants, Lauren, I replied calmly. Colin wants you isolated from anyone who might expose the truth about him. Colin laughed dismissively. The truth? The truth is you're a bitter old man who can't stand to see his daughter happy. The truth is, you're making up lies because you can't accept she doesn't need you anymore. His words were carefully designed to hurt, to provoke me into an outburst that would prove his point about my mental instability. But I had learned how to control my emotions. The truth, Colin, is that you're Christopher Hall, and in 2 weeks, everyone's going to know that. The threat was subtle but clear, and Colin understood it perfectly. After they left, I replayed the conversation in my mind. Colin had shown more of his true nature, his threats, his manipulation, his growing desperation. He was losing control, and he knew it. The mention of the money had planted the first seed of doubt in Lauren, even if she didn't want to admit it. More importantly, Colin now knew I had enough information to destroy him. That would make him more dangerous, but also more desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. I just had to wait for the right moment to take advantage of those inevitable missteps. That night, Colin called me again. His voice had changed. Less confident, more cautious. Earl, we need to talk like civilized men. Maybe we can reach an understanding. Now he wanted to negotiate. Exactly what I had hoped for. What kind of understanding? I asked, pretending to be open. Well, you have your concerns, I get that. Maybe if you returned the documents and stopped digging, I could make it worth your while. He was trying to bribe me. The nerve. How much? I asked, curious how far he'd go. $100,000. Cash. No questions asked. Twice what he had borrowed from me. Colin, I said slowly, do you really think you can buy me? He chuckled nervously. Every man has his price, Earl. What's yours? That one question revealed everything about him. Colin saw the entire world through a lens of corruption and greed. He couldn't imagine someone acting out of principle instead of profit. My price is simple, Colin. Walk away from my daughter's life. Disappear the same way you did in Miami, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The silence that followed was long. When he finally spoke again, his voice had returned to its cold, threatening tone. You're making a big mistake, Earl. One that could cost you dearly. And then he hung up. Smiling, I made a note in my notebook. Colin attempted bribe, $100K, refused. Threats escalating. He's desperate. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had planned. Colin was feeling trapped, making worse and worse decisions, slowly revealing his true nature to Lauren. She still didn't want to accept reality, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Now it was only a matter of time before she began asking the right questions. And when that happened, I would be ready with all the answers. Colin Hatcher had completely underestimated the power of patience combined with accurate information. The situation was progressing exactly as I had anticipated. Colin was reacting with growing desperation. Lauren was beginning to question certain things, and I held every advantage. They believed they were cornering me with threats and emotional manipulation. What they didn't realize was that they were only falling deeper into the trap I had carefully prepared. What do you think I did next? I kept waiting patiently, because I knew Colin would soon make the fatal mistake I needed. And when that moment came, I would be ready to deliver the final blow that would end the game once and for all. Colin's fatal mistake came on a Friday morning, just 1 week before the wedding. My phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Lauren, her voice choked with tears and total panic. She said Colin had disappeared 2 days earlier and left a note claiming he had to travel to handle urgent business issues. My heart raced, not out of worry, but anticipation. Colin was following his classic pattern, vanishing the moment pressure mounted. Lauren added that vendors were demanding payment and that Colin had taken all the money from their joint account. I asked how much, though I already knew the answer. Lauren sobbed as she replied, $80,000. Everything she had saved, plus the wedding gifts that had already arrived. Plus, the pause in her voice was telling. I pressed gently, and she admitted it also included the $50,000 I had lent him. Now she knew. Colin had disappeared with $130,000, leaving my daughter to face a swarm of furious creditors alone. It was his classic move. Build trust, collect funds, vanish at the last second. But this time, he had underestimated a critical variable. The victim's father had plans of his own. While I waited for Lauren to arrive, I called my bank and scheduled an urgent meeting for that afternoon. Not to cancel the check. I had already decided to do that weeks ago. The meeting was to officially document the cancellation and ensure everything followed proper legal procedures. I also called 3 local journalists I had known since my teaching days. I told the first, I have an interesting story about a financial fraudster who's been operating for over a decade. The response was eager. Colin wanted to vanish quietly. I would make sure his disappearance made as much noise as possible. Lauren arrived 2 hours later, completely shattered. It was painful to see her like that, but it was necessary. She needed to see Colin for who he really was, and unfortunately the truth sometimes only lands when accompanied by real-world consequences. She said she didn't understand. Colin had told her he loved her, that they would build a life together. I sat beside her on the couch and placed a hand on her shoulder. I explained that Colin had never loved her. She had simply been another mark, another name on a long list of victims. Then I showed her the evidence she had refused to look at weeks earlier. This time, Lauren examined everything with painful attention. The side-by-side photos, the court records, the victim testimonies. She read aloud one name, Sarah Mitchell, from Los Angeles, lost $180,000 to Christopher Hall in 2019. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. Jessica Rodriguez from Miami, Amanda Thompson from Chicago. All of them. Her voice trailed off. I reminded her that all of them believed he loved them, just as she had. Watching my daughter process the reality of the manipulation she had endured was heartbreaking, but it was also necessary. She had to fully understand who Colin really was. Dad, you knew about all of this for weeks. Why didn't you force me to see it? Lauren asked, tears running down her face. I told her I had tried, but she hadn't been ready to listen. Sometimes, unfortunately, we need to feel the consequences before we can accept painful truths. She nodded slowly, finally understanding why I had tried so hard to warn her. With bitterness, she said that Colin had been right about one thing. I really had tried to protect my little girl. I embraced Lauren for the first time in months and reminded her that she was a strong woman who had survived a professional predator. Now, it was time for the next phase of the plan. I told Lauren there was something she needed to know about the $50,000. She looked at me curiously. I explained that Colin had asked me for the money 6 weeks ago, claiming it was temporary and would be paid back before the wedding. I opened a drawer and pulled out the original check, still intact. Lauren looked confused. She asked how Colin could have used the money if I still had the check. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because, I told her, I had never actually deposited the money into his account. I had made a temporary transfer, one that could be canceled at any moment. At that exact moment the phone rang, almost as if scripted. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. I answered on speaker so Lauren could hear everything. The voice on the other end was desperate. It was Colin, saying he urgently needed to talk. Lauren stiffened when she heard the voice of the man who had just destroyed her life. I greeted him by his other names, Christopher, or maybe Chris Hutcherson. The silence on the other end was satisfying. Colin said there had been a misunderstanding and that he could explain everything. I asked where my daughter's money was. He claimed it was safe, which was obviously a lie. I told Colin I had some interesting news for him. I asked if he remembered those $50,000 he thought he had stolen from me. Then I delivered the twist. That money never actually existed. The transfer had been canceled that very morning at the bank. The silence that followed was long and heavy. When Colin finally spoke again, his voice was filled with panic. He said it was impossible, that he had seen the money in the account. I explained that what he saw was a temporary transfer, an illusion that could be reversed at any time. Lauren looked at me with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Colin tried to threaten me one last time. He said I didn't understand the consequences of what I had done, that he had contacts and resources and could make my life hell. I laughed. A genuine, liberating laugh. I reminded him that he had been on the run for 3 days with my daughter's money and owed thousands to vendors in Newport. His heavy breathing on the line revealed how shaken he was. I finished by telling him that I had just handed his full criminal history to 3 local journalists. By tomorrow morning, all of Newport would know who Colin Hatcher really was. His days as a predator in Newport were officially over. Colin made one last desperate move. He claimed that Lauren still loved him, that she would forgive him, and eventually understand that all of this had been a misunderstanding. It was the perfect cue. I told him to ask her himself, and handed the phone to Lauren. She stared at the device for a few seconds before speaking with a cold, steady, and definitive tone. She told him, regardless of which name he went by, Colin, Christopher, or anything else, that if he ever attempted to contact her again, she would personally ensure he ended up in prison. Then she hung up. The silence that followed was deep and liberating. Lauren looked at me with tears in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. She asked if I had planned everything from the beginning. I nodded slowly and explained that from the moment Colin asked me for the money, I had known something was wrong. I had spent weeks investigating, documenting, and preparing. She asked why I hadn't told her the plan, and I said it was because she needed to discover the truth for herself. If I had simply stopped the wedding, she would always wonder, what if? It was a painful truth, but a necessary one. That afternoon, we went together to the bank to formally cancel the transfer. The bank manager listened to our story with growing interest. He remarked that I had essentially created a perfect financial trap. That was exactly what it had been. Colin had become complicit in his own downfall by accepting money that technically never existed. The manager encouraged us to document everything for the authorities, noting that our evidence could help prevent future victims from falling into similar schemes. We left the bank knowing that Colin was now financially finished. But was that enough? Colin was an experienced predator. He had escaped tight situations before. He still had Lauren's money, still knew our addresses, still had the potential to retaliate. As night fell, I began to wonder if I had underestimated the danger of a desperate man. Lauren seemed calmer, but I knew the real test was yet to come. Colin would soon find out about the journalists, about the public exposure waiting for him. How would a cornered animal react? Should I have involved the police from the start? My phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. The message was short but chilling. Colin warned that this wasn't over, that I didn't understand the consequences of my actions, and that we'd see each other soon. I showed the message to Lauren, who was visibly shaken. She asked if Colin might come back, if he might try to hurt us. It was the question I had avoided facing, but now it was unavoidable. I had destroyed Colin financially, but a predator with nothing left to lose could be incredibly dangerous. I looked out the living room window. The night was dark, very dark. Colin knew our house, our routines, our vulnerabilities. I told Lauren she should stay with me that night and, in fact, that we should stay together for the next few days. She agreed, clearly anxious. As we prepared dinner, every noise outside made us glance toward the windows. Was Colin unhinged enough to try something physical? Had my carefully orchestrated revenge created a more dangerous enemy? The night promised to be long, very long. And deep in the back of my mind, one haunting question remained. What is a man with nothing left to lose truly capable of doing? The first payoff of my strategy came at 6 o'clock the next morning, when my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, neighbors, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were all calling. Everyone wanted to know about the Newport con man. The headline screamed, "Financial predator operated in Newport for 2 years," accompanied by side-by-side photos of Colin under his various aliases. The evidence I had provided to the reporters was laid out with devastating clarity. Court documents, victim testimonies, bank records. Colin Hatcher had woken up famous for all the wrong reasons. Lauren was in the kitchen making coffee when I showed her the newspapers. Her reaction was a mixture of relief and horror as she saw Colin's face plastered everywhere. She asked if this meant he would never be able to do this to anyone again. I told her that at the very least, not this way, and not under that name. That's when the phone rang again. This time it was Detective Sarah Chen from the Newport Police Department. She had read the article and wanted to speak with us urgently about the case. The meeting at the station was absolutely surreal for both of us. Detective Chen had printed all the articles and spread my evidence across the table like pieces of a massive puzzle. She told me that in 20 years on the force, she had rarely seen a case so well documented by a private citizen. She flipped through the pages with care, stating that the materials were sufficient not only to prosecute Colin for fraud, but also to notify law enforcement in 6 other states. Lauren held my hand tightly as the detective laid out the next steps. Arrest warrants, account freezes, federal coordination. The phone call that changed everything came 2 hours after we got home from the station. It was Sarah Mitchell, the widow from Los Angeles whom Colin had cruelly defrauded in 2019. Her voice was filled with emotion. She said she had seen the news and couldn't believe someone had finally managed to expose the man who had ruined so many lives. She told me that 7 more of Colin's former victims had come forward after reading the papers. All of them wanted to unite in a coordinated civil suit against him. Sarah told me that I hadn't just saved my daughter, I had given hope to all of them. But the most satisfying consequence came 3 days later, when we received an official call from the Canadian police. Colin had been arrested while trying to cross the border using false documents and was being held for immediate extradition. The officer reported that he was carrying around $40,000 in cash, likely what was left after paying for forged papers. That meant the majority of Lauren's stolen money had been wasted on a desperate escape attempt. The irony was perfect. Colin had stolen $130,000 and spent nearly all of it to get caught. Lauren chose to transform her traumatic experience into a greater purpose, helping other women. The following week, she gave a brave interview on local television, warning viewers about the signs of predators like Colin. She spoke directly to the cameras, saying that her father had tried to protect her, but that she had been blinded by Colin's sophisticated emotional manipulation. Watching my daughter speak with such maturity and strength about her experience was one of the proudest moments of my life. She had turned victimhood into empowerment, personal pain into a social mission. If our story could save even one person, then the entire nightmare would have been worth it. Calls of gratitude from other victims poured in throughout the week. Amanda Thompson from Chicago called me in tears, saying Colin had left her with $20,000 in credit card debt he had convinced her to rack up. Jessica Rodriguez from Miami said she had lost hope that Colin would ever be brought to justice. Knowing he was now in custody, unable to hurt anyone else, gave her peace for the first time in 3 years. Every phone call confirmed that my decision to expose Colin publicly had been the right one. He wasn't just a con artist, he was a serial predator systematically destroying lives. The most emotional moment came when Detective Chen called with an update on the ongoing federal investigation. She told me that, thanks to the evidence I had provided and the new testimonies that surfaced, they were able to link Colin to 12 different cases. There was satisfaction in her voice when she said the total documented losses exceeded $2 million. Colin wasn't just facing a few years in jail, he was now looking at decades behind bars. The FBI had taken over the case, and Colin Hatcher had become a national-level priority. What started as my personal act of quiet revenge had become the largest romance fraud crackdown of the year. The final irony arrived in the form of a pathetic letter Colin sent from the Canadian prison. It was a desperate attempt at manipulation, even from behind bars. He wrote that I had ruined his life out of jealousy, that he and Lauren had truly loved each other, and that I had destroyed their happiness. True to form, Colin couldn't take responsibility for the systematic crimes he had committed against vulnerable women. I showed the letter to Lauren, who let out a bitter laugh. She said he still believed they had been a real couple. We tore the letter in half together. It was our symbolic way of closing that chapter for good. The most poetic ending came 6 months later, when we received a legal notice informing us that Colin's assets were being auctioned to compensate his victims. Among the items listed was the expensive engagement ring he had given Lauren, purchased with money stolen from a widow in Atlanta. Lauren chose not to reclaim the ring, insisting the funds be directed to the other victims. She said the ring represented nothing but lies, and that she didn't want anything that reminded her of that time. Colin was ruined, prosecuted, imprisoned, and completely forgotten. Forever. 6 months after everything ended, I'm sitting here in my favorite armchair, the same one where Margaret used to read her novels. The silence in the house no longer feels heavy. It's peaceful, comforting. Lauren visits every Sunday now, just like we used to. But these days she brings different stories. Stories about her volunteer work helping fraud victims, and about the new boyfriend she introduced to me respectfully. A real man, with a verifiable background, a known family, solid values. Someone who won her over slowly, without rushing, without grand promises. Just the way it should be. Letters of gratitude still arrive from women across the country who read about the case. Sarah Mitchell writes to me every month with updates on her financial and emotional recovery. In her last letter she wrote, "Professor Green, you restored my faith in justice and human kindness." Jessica Rodriguez found a new job and is steadily paying off the debt Colin convinced her to take on. Amanda Thompson learned to trust again and got married last year. Every story of recovery confirms that I did the right thing, even when it was painful for everyone involved. The most important lesson I've learned is this: sometimes true love requires decisions that hurt in the moment. Lauren had to go through that pain to fully understand the kind of man Colin really was. If I had simply stopped the wedding without letting her discover the truth for herself, she would always have wondered, what if? Now she knows, without any doubt, that she escaped a lifetime of manipulation and financial abuse. The traumatic experience became practical wisdom. Sometimes, as parents, we have to let our children stumble in order for them to learn how to walk safely. What makes me most proud is how Lauren turned her experience into a greater purpose. She became a volunteer for an organization that supports victims of romance fraud, sharing her story to warn others. Last month, she told me about a woman who was about to loan $50,000 to an online financial consultant. Lauren immediately recognized the signs and convinced her to investigate first. They discovered he was another con artist using tactics similar to Colin's. One life was saved because my daughter found the courage to speak up. These quiet days make me think of Margaret often, and I wonder whether she would have approved of my actions. Sometimes I believe she would. She was always protective when it came to Lauren. Other times, I think she might have found a gentler way to handle the situation. Margaret had a gift for making people see the truth without feeling attacked. But Margaret wasn't here, and I had to use the tools I had: patience, research, and quiet determination. In the end, Lauren is safe, Colin is in prison, and other women have been protected. Margaret would be proud of the result. The house feels different now, more alive, filled with renewed purpose. Lauren brought new plants to the garden Margaret once loved, and we work on them together on the weekends. She cooks for me sometimes, trying out recipes she finds online, always asking for my honest opinion. We laugh more than we used to, and we talk about books the way we did when she was a teenager. Our relationship is stronger than ever because we went through a fire together. Mutual trust was tested and proven unbreakable. Neighbors treat me with a different kind of respect now. I'm no longer just the gentle retired teacher. I'm the man who investigated a professional criminal and took him down using nothing but intelligence and patience. Some ask me for advice about suspicious relationships involving daughters or granddaughters. Others want to know how to spot financial scams. Apparently, decades of analyzing literary characters prepared me perfectly for analyzing real-life ones with dishonest motives. It turns out to be a valuable skill for our community. When I look back on this journey, from that first gut feeling to Colin's final arrest, I feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the calm satisfaction of having done the right thing for the right reasons. I protected my daughter, helped other women, removed a predator from society, and rebuilt a family bond I feared was lost. I used the skills I'd honed over decades of teaching to solve a real-world problem with real-world consequences. The lesson is simple. Never underestimate the power of a determined father with time on his hands and a just cause. Margaret would be proud. Lauren is safe, and the peace I feel now is priceless. Now I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment below and subscribe to the channel. In the meantime, I'm leaving one of the channel's favorite stories on the end screen, and I promise it's one that will definitely surprise you. Thanks for watching.